All right. My name is Nora Benavides. I work with Free Press. I'm our senior counsel and director of digital justice and civil rights. I am so thrilled that we are holding this webinar today. We have entitled it The Time Is Now, Solidarity Over Surveillance. And we've been thinking about this at Free Press for many months. We have witnessed the explicit targeting of protest groups, of immigrant groups, of anyone who engages in tentatively oppositional speech to those in power. This isn't a news story. And I'll be honest, if you've watched any sci-fi movie, read any of those sci-fi books that we all often turn to, you probably know this plot line. There is an all-powerful state using overt force, widespread surveillance to chill people, to monitor their every movement, whether you call it the panopticon or Big Brother. It induces a palpable fear everywhere. And it's because of this that we have started thinking about how we respond as a community, as a set of stakeholders worried about this rising authoritarian control. The time is now is really what we thought. And so today's webinar is an invitation to learn about how surveillance is chilling our communities, how tech tools in the most sophisticated ways may be used now to monitor our movements online and offline. I'm so honored to be here today to kick off our forthcoming campaign. Free Press is anchoring with the Disinfo Defense League and over 30 other partners. The campaign is called Solidarity Over Surveillance, and you'll hear about it later today at the end of our discussion. Just a few ground rules, of course. We are here on Zoom today. We have a Q&A function. So if you hear something and you want to engage with us, please drop it in the Q&A function. I'd love to do a short round of introductions with our amazing panelists. I rarely get nervous, and I am so honored to be with these three people. I cannot tell you. I'm going to bother them endlessly after it because I'm truly in awe of the work that they do, how long they have been in community. And so I started with about 4 pages of introductions, and I had to whittle it down because they're so amazing. I want to start with Chad Marlow, who I have known for Chad over a decade. Chad is senior policy counsel at the ACLU. He focuses on privacy, surveillance, technology issues, but he also has been, I think, one of the intellectual hubs in the United States for how we conceive of anti-surveillance policies. He's authored over 25 model bills for the ACLU. He's the primary author of groundbreaking research on student surveillance, on other topics. I think he maybe participated in Hot Wings contests. I don't really know, Chad. You can talk about it down the line. And directs both of the ACLU's take control and community control over police surveillance campaigns. If you go back online and dig through the hashtag Get the Flock Out, I think you'll find that a certain person named Chad Marlow was the genesis of that hashtag. So Chad, I'm so honored that you are here. I want to then next introduce Memo Torres, who I have personally followed for so long. His formal title is Director of Engagement and Journalist with L.A.Taco. L.A.Taco, at least when I remember way back when, began because I would follow Memo raiding tacos throughout Los Angeles. He's the host of a number of different things. He writes for Apple Maps, where Memo Torres eats in LA, so you got to follow the maps there. You can see him on Netflix, Taco Chronicles, and Pressure Cooker. You can hear him on KCRW. He often joins the various programs there. But when ICE raids began last year, I remember personally seeing Memo's profile just skyrocket when you started monitoring and showing audiences where ICE was in Los Angeles, the treatment that immigrants and protest groups were receiving, the violent crackdowns on completely legal, acceptable speech, the comings and goings of people in their everyday lives. You have done such an amazing job covering these issues for people. And you're still rating tacos, I think. So I'm in awe and so thrilled. And then last but not least, the luminary herself, Safiya Noble, is so many things. The formal title, of course, is the David O. Sears Presidential Chair in Social Sciences at UCLA. She is a professor in the Gender Studies Department, director of the Center on Resilience and Digital Justice at UCLA, among several other titles and roles where she supports the digital civil rights field. Safiya's research focuses on the design of digital media and its impact on society, particularly how tech tools and AI intersect with issues of race, gender, culture, power, all of our favorite things today. She's the author of Algorithms of Oppression. If you don't have it, you should go buy it. I'm not even getting a cut of any sales, but it will change your life. She was really one of the original OG voices that noted that tech tools and the rise of surveillance capitalism were, in fact, biased systems. She's regarded as one of the foremost experts on algorithmic and online discrimination. I cannot say enough wonderful things. She's also funny. No promises she'll be funny today, but she's just a delight. And so I had to do that intro because what you have before you is a set of people that, in some manner, care about what is happening to our communities. And they have spent their careers documenting, researching, building solutions. I'm also honored to be joined by my colleague, Amanda Beckham. And Amanda is our government affairs director who has been working with me on our free press campaigns, our policy efforts, the kinds of ways that we envision how we solve the problems you all are documenting. And so later in the discussion, I'm hoping that Amanda will grace us, and I'm going to force her in just a little bit to talk about what we're doing on the ground, how Free Press Action is fighting for legislative reforms. Hopefully, she and Chad will get together and make all of our dreams come true. So, with that, I want to begin with some of the problems, some of what we've seen on the ground. And I think, of course, we have to turn to Memo first and foremost. Whether it's your taco ratings or something much more serious, I want to hear some of the more sinister observations you've seen on the ground. I've seen you almost daily, but I'm not sure everyone else has. And you do an amazing job of showing us what you've seen, and the way that those in power are using surveillance to crack down on communities. Can you share some of your observations, Memo?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, surrounded by a great group of folks. I don't know if I'm as, as like you say, such a great person as, the rest of the folks here, but
You
um,
are. We know it.
yeah, I mean, I've been keeping track of all the raids, all the videos, information, with rapid responders in the back end. I can tell you that since the raids started, we really did see the power of AI and them using AI heavily. We've seen it through the agents' phones. We've seen it through the flock systems on the cameras on the streets. I mean, right now, what we're seeing like day to day is that they're constantly pulling vehicles over, and usually vehicles that they're tracking their license plates. So the flock cameras are definitely in place. We know that they have Border Patrol and DHS and ICE has access to over 80,000 cameras nationwide. And that includes every camera, like whether it be speed camera, it be a flock camera, it could be any kind of camera. Um, we know that we started with the raids. We started seeing all these agents use their phones a lot. They do a lot of facial recognition with their phones. So whether it be somebody they're targeting or anybody that's kind of like in their way or being confrontational, they'll go and register their face and try to get as much info as they can. So people are getting put into this database by ICE, using facial recognition. We know that 404 Media reported not too long ago that Palantir has provided 20 million targets through their AI surveillance systems through their phones. So it could be something where like it's something where like if an agent's in a certain area and they'll get pinged as to a target that's close to that area, and they know that the target's in that area because of either a license plate reader, or facial recognition camera. So then they'll go out and look for those people, and that's a lot what we see right now is agents going out and scouting areas and waiting for their phones to get pinged. Um, we also see how the Trump administration, I don't know if you guys have heard of NSPM-7, which is this crazy ass document that the White House put out. It's on the White House's website. basically detailing the new group of people that are going to be targets now, which is anybody that's anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, anti-ICE, anti-American values. So they're going to create this whole new database of people that are considered dissenters of the new regime. And he already tapped Palantir to start building a database similar to the 20 million people that they have already as a target for ICE. They're going to build a similar database of people that are dissenting against the Trump administration, and it's all going to be powered through the same Palantir AI systems. If you haven't heard of Palantir, you should look into it. Palantir is really trying to push for all this new AI surveillance. They have these huge contracts. They've already placed people all up in the government, and yeah, they're kind of crazy. They came out with this new book called what is the New Techno Republic? So there's a new term coming around called the AI Fascist Techno Republic Surveillance State is basically what they're promoting. So yeah, that's what we're seeing right now on the ground.
And I know, Memo, that you told me you feel sometimes you sound like a conspiracy theorist because you go down these rabbit holes and it feels almost unreal, like too bad to believe. Can you just share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've been working on this article for taking me now a couple months, and it's honestly the only thing holding me back from publishing it is that it just sounds way too fucking crazy. Like it's like I feel like the meme of the guy from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where he has a board and he's like, you know.
Uh-huh.
Just tying everything together, and it's just like, is this really like reality? And everything's sourced, everything's been written about, and the crazy thing about it is that this administration and all the cronies around it are not hiding it anymore. They're just putting it out in the open. Like, this is what we're doing. We hear the founder of Palantir talking about how his surveillance and AI systems were used in Palestine, and he calls all of them, useful idiots. Everybody that died in Palestine. That's a quote. They don't care about people. They think people are kind of in the way and tools, and this is a new state that they're pushing. So I'm reading all this. I've read about all these documents and books and speeches, and I've seen these videos and these people, the plans that they're trying to promote, and I'm just like, this cannot be real life. Like, so I can't bring myself to
Mhm.
publish this article because I just don't think people are going to believe it.
Well, we'll convince you by the end of this because we need you documenting. I want to turn to Safiya, who there's this term I think a lot about, the enchantment of technology, that it's hard for us to imagine the impossibility of something and that it can maybe be sinister because it's so unfathomable. It's almost amazing, that we have these tools in our hands here that we can literally connect as we are here today because of a set of systems that allow us to. I think there is an underbelly to the amazement, to the enchantment of technology. You have done so much work documenting that. I think even before anyone really believed it was happening, before there was evidence, I'd love for you to just talk about this history of aggressive and biased systems. How are they baked into society?
Yeah, thanks, Nora. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm equally your big fan. Memo, I can really relate to what you're saying about writing against the grain, and I would say probably in 2011, I started writing about this upstart company that everyone was in love with called Google, and there were only a handful of people at that time who had written kind of critically about Silicon Valley because so many people were enamored with the kinds of products and projects that were coming out of the Valley. And for good reason. Listen, I mean, many people who were on the internet, let's say in the web 1.0 era, myself included, kind of pre-graphic user interface, the text-based internet, right? I mean, there's so much gray hair in here, you don't even want to know. And we remember how difficult it was to use that kind of early web, even though it was exciting. If you wanted to know something, you kind of had to go into a chat room or go into a bulletin board system or kind of enter spaces where you did understand kind of the subjective nature of what you were dealing with. And we had people who were organizing information and knowledge and kind of enthusiasts, DIYers, librarians, subject matter experts. And, we were accultured to understanding our world with and through other people. And the early web was really kind of like a digital experience of that. But what a lot of people didn't even know back then in the early days of the internet is that, the internet was this Department of Defense network, that emanated out of DARPA. It was, while many people think of it as kind of like a novel experience of networking computers, connecting computers so that we could transfer information. It really was a military project that was designed to ensure that both military secrets, but also military science that was used in service of the United States, could not move into the hands of, let's say, enemies of the empire or enemies of the United States. And a lot of people may not remember this, but in the old days, the way scientists shared information and built fields of knowledge was they typed up their papers and put them in the mail and mailed them to each other. And then they engaged with each other. They published in journals. And they, what we do in academia is we speak back to and we argue and we deepen and enrich knowledge in these ways. But the network allowed for kind of a more instantaneous kind of transfer and an acceleration of military power during the Cold War and emanating out of the Cold War. And what that really was also about was ensuring that certain kinds of knowledge did not make it into the non-aligned movements. And of course, for the people here who know their history, this is like the liberation, the anti-colonial movements that were happening around the world, the kind of fights against war, the Vietnam War, and other kinds of colonial wars. And so this is the origin story of the internet. And so that we go to this moment in 2026 where Memo can talk about Palantir and a sophisticated database that's about tracking enemies. This is just the modern contemporary version of a very old, long historical kind of process of surveilling and controlling people and communities in service of the very things that Memo described, which is people who would be against living under imperialist state control or living under white supremacy and, or Jim Crow or anti-civil rights, anti-human rights kinds of paradigms, laws, systems, economies. And I think this is the, of course, along the way, we've had a lot of gamification and seductive ways to pull us all in and create like our addiction that keeps us ensnared into these platforms and these products. And many of us here have been working on and thinking about, the very complex digital environment that we're in. But I would say the surveillance origin story, the surveillance of how people move and share and think is at the heart of the internet. And that has made it also a dangerous place for people to organize and share information, because also as quickly as, we try to organize for civil and human rights, we do that kind of in the specter of law enforcement's gaze and control too. I will say that it is a scary dystopian moment. And Memo, the things also that, whether it's Project 2025 and, the manifestos that emanate from this administration, those are also terrifying dystopian screeds about how to organize this country. And, we are certainly having a more rapid dismantling of our rights, all the way to like the most foundational kinds of ideas like the First Amendment. This entire webinar, I'm sure, to someone from someone's vantage point is a threat, even though what we're here to do is to talk about protecting the public, protecting people, protecting their rights.
Safiya, I could listen to you go on forever. Maybe that's why you teach. That's why your work is so evocative. it isn't just any group that is being targeted. And I want to put a finer point on that because Amanda has done an amazing job documenting in our SOS campaign the history of surveillance. Going back to the 1700s, Amanda had primers upon primers around lantern laws, the way that lantern laws were, enacted centuries ago so that Black, mixed race, and Indigenous people had to carry lanterns if they walked around after dark without a white individual with them. I want to hear you talk a little bit more about not just how violently dystopian this realm is now that we are in. We're in that space. Who is the most at risk?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. As devastating as it is to think about the normalization of owning human beings and trafficking human beings, a practice that is in fact still alive and well today, as we know. These laws have always been about the control of people of color, explicitly, Black Americans, African Americans, people of African descent, people of the Caribbean, Indigenous people, although, other kinds of violent sequestering and control have been deployed toward First Nations and Indigenous people. But certainly the control over the movement and the kind of the pernicious way in which that gets reinscribed over and over and over with every new generation. There are new modalities for that, whether it's redlining and segregation, whether it's burning down Black communities, brown communities, once they reach a modicum of economic power, whether it's Jim Crow laws and a complete undoing of Reconstruction, or in the through the 1950s, through the early 1980s, the kind of counterintelligence program of the United States government, COINTELPRO practices. These have always been targeted at groups that are explicitly focused on civil rights, human rights, feminism, economic power for poor and working people, labor, Indigenous sovereignty, Puerto Rican independence. We could name many organizations. And I think that's very important because simultaneously, we have also studied and understand that the most threatening groups in the United States in terms of violence and danger in our society are the KKK, white supremacist organizations, neo-Nazis, Christian nationalists, people who are apartheidists, modern day American apartheidists. And even by the government's own definitions, these are the most dangerous organizations in the country. January 6th insurrectionists. I mean, we could add so many groups to this. And those are not the groups that are targeted, in fact, by the kinds of things that Memo is describing and the kinds of work that Chad is doing. So it is very important that we are very clear and explicit about who is in the crosshairs as they organize for peace and safety, quite frankly, and inclusion, and who is not in the crosshairs as they advocate for the destruction of the federal government and the destruction of all rights-based frameworks in this country.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad you put a finer point on it because so often we can talk about oppression. We can talk about those in power who use and exploit their power. But I think without talking about and centering our communities, we're doing a disservice to the experiences that people live through, that they go through. What Safiya has brought up for me is that it isn't just algorithms of oppression. These are systems of oppression that are baked into our society. And if our laws have been built to further and advance and perpetuate inequities, I think about, well, what do we do to solve that, to fix our laws, to build new systems? And of course, Chad has been so elegantly waiting and listening and, positioning, ready to come in. Chad, I want to bring you into this because while a traditionally perfect privacy expert, you can't find a whole lot on what Chad does online because he's so good at locking it down. Chad has been in the weeds in cities, in schools. I know years ago you started working on the Detroit surveillance issues. I have seen your career chart this very large national landscape. I think you were on the surveillance beat before maybe anyone, maybe. And to your credit, you have just slowly built this profile. And I think for the ACLU, grounding the harms that Memo and Safiya are naming by pivoting to solutions. And so that's a lot of what we do at Free Press. We pivot to, okay, we know the problem is horrific. It is existential sometimes, and it is built on a system of inequities. But the solutions are also available to us. And so I just want to hear, one, your reaction generally, Chad, and then from your experience working in the trenches here, how are you seeing interventions? Where do you see the moment for interventions, if the time is now?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Nora. Thank you for having me. And I would have been happy to have stayed silent and listened to the other speakers the entire call. I was very much enjoying that. I will probably enjoy that far more than listening to myself speak. But I would, obviously I agree with everything that has been said. One of the things that we always talk about, in the surveillance space is that surveillance is a threat to everyone's privacy, but it's not a threat to everyone's privacy equally. And so, I have always tried to center our work around the people who are the most impacted by surveillance. And also, I think very importantly, while I recognize that performative efforts are a tool in the toolbox of people who are trying to make change, I am always trying to focus in on impact. How do we actually make people's lives better? How do we actually make people's lives safer from surveillance? It's often a great curiosity to me when people say, but we need surveillance to keep people safe. And I always say, what people and safe from whom? Because to me, if you're talking about Black and brown communities, Muslim communities, LGBTQ communities, people seeking abortion care, gender affirming care, a variety of other things, these are the people who are at risk. And my focus is on keeping them safe from the surveillors, from government who have bad intentions towards them. And so, when I think about making change in the country, let me start with I think what are two pieces of very good news. The first good news is I've been doing this work for 12 years, and I have never seen a stronger anti-surveillance environment amongst the public in the United States than I see right now. So that is very good news. And Memo, what you're talking about writing believe me, I've written a lot of things where I'm like, people are going to be like, where's your tinfoil hat, Chad? But I think the reason why people are more anti-surveillance is because people like Memo are publishing these documents. And what seems shocking at first, eventually they absorb. This is a very weird thing. I said to do something weird on the call, and here it is. I actually was looking at some still shots of a very old Jetson episode, the Jetsons, and there was a screenshot of Judy, the daughter Judy, for those who remember the song, looking at a square device with her boyfriend on it, and they were laughing. And when people looked at that in the 1960s, they probably thought that was absolutely absurd, that she'd be carrying around something in her hand that was rectangular that would enable her to talk live with her boyfriend. But sure enough, that's a tablet, and we do it all the time now. It's just exposure to reality makes things that were once weird seem normal. And so I think that that's what's happening with surveillance. What used to feel like, oh, I saw Minority Report with Tom Cruise, that's horrifying, but that's not going to ever happen. Now people look to China, and that's exactly what is happening in China nowadays. There's actually a story in the New York Times this week about China developing a technology, and they would be there if it weren't for the difficulty in coming up with AI chips, but developing a technology that will enable the Chinese government to predict who will be a dissident in the future, who will speak out against the government in the future. Like, this is the direction that things could potentially go. So the first bit of good news is I think Americans are becoming strongly anti-surveillance now. The second bit of good news is that this pushback is nonpartisan, which is critically important because we know that when issues become partisan in our country nowadays, that is the death knell for progress. Because people spend all the time trying to fight their enemies, trying to one-up each other, and we don't actually make progress. We have the opportunity to do that on surveillance issues. It doesn't mean we don't have opposition, but it's not everyday people who are opposing one another. We will have to fight law enforcement. We will have to fight the government. We will have to fight technology companies, but we will not have to fight each other. And it's that kind of collective organization that gives us opportunities. So where are those opportunities? They're everywhere. They're on the federal level, they're on the state level, they're on the local level. I will tell you in the first instance that I don't spend an overwhelming amount of time on the federal level because Congress doesn't spend an enormous amount of time trying to solve problems. And since I'm in the business of solving problems, I will go where the opportunities are. Not so true on the state and local level, however, where we're actually seeing a lot of progress on a lot of anti-surveillance initiatives. And that can be everything from focuses on specific risks, like dragnet reverse warrants that just sweep in the location or keyword searches of everybody. We have automatic license plate readers and block, which is a big issue. We have something called the Fourth Amendment's Not for Sale Act, which allows people to circumvent warrants by just buying data. And we have tons and tons of technologies, facial recognition, gait recognition, cell site simulators. The list goes on and on of these technologies. And we have model bills to fight all those things. And we also have larger programs like Community Control Over Police Surveillance, or CCOPS, which now has laws in 26 American cities covering over 18 million residents, which transfer local decisions about acquiring and using surveillance technologies from a secretive, unilateral police-driven process to one that is transparent, community-led, and ultimately has decisions made by democratically accountable city council members. So the final thing I'll say in terms of like thinking about progress is that getting something done on anti-surveillance is absolutely about making the right arguments and the right policy choices. But politics is about counting, right? Will my career and my chance of continuing to be an elected official be better served by taking this position or that position? And I don't want to suggest that there are no elected officials who will do the right thing up against popular risk. That does exist. But by and large, it's a rarity. It's a rarity that they will go against what seems to be what's in their best political interest. So for all of us, and this is where I think Free Press's campaign is so important and all of our work together is so important, the only way that we are going to get a politician who's saying, I agree with you on the issue, I agree with you on the policy proposal, but I can't do this because it will hurt me politically, is to make them realize it will hurt them more politically to go against us than to be with us. And so we need to organize, we need to come together. If you want to come up with something to fight for, I have at least 25 separate things that I'd be happy to share with anyone who wants. But the most important thing is, right now, the government, technology companies, and law enforcement are extremely powerful. What they lack in numbers, they have in power. But at the end of the day, democracy is about elections, and they don't get to vote, we do. So as long as we can make clear to them that most of their constituents not only know about these issues, not only care about these issues, but will vote on these issues, we have a chance to make real progress, especially in this overwhelmingly nonpartisan anti-surveillance environment that we're living in today.
Oof. All right. Mic drop on Chad. I mean, yes, the time is now, is what I hear from you, with a healthy dose of pragmatism on our lawmakers and the realities of what makes them make their own decisions. You know, I can't help but I was in community the other day talking with people in Los Angeles about digital bias, about how there is this sort of system underneath what we do every day when we go to the grocery store, how we're, engaging in community. And everyone came up to me afterwards and they said, I didn't know about this invisible problem. And I want to talk about the invisibility of it. I'm not going to embarrass Safiya by quoting her book, but there are numerous quotes on the invisible nature of the problem. I guess I want to sort of open it up to everyone here. What would you tell someone if they heard this webinar, they said, "Wow, each of these speakers amazing." But this surveillance doesn't really touch me. I'm not impacted. I'm not protesting, or I'm not seeking an abortion, or I'm not, you name it, going to a mosque. All of the kinds of case studies we know that have been well documented. What would you tell someone who felt like maybe the surveillance problem is not affecting or touching them?
Well, I'll jump in and say, and I'll just talk about a kind of what's increasingly becoming a more ubiquitous type of household technology that a lot of people are using, especially at work. Most people right now are being forced, at least if they're in any kind of, desk job, let's say, they are increasingly encouraged to use AI or chatbots or large language models. These are, of course, also surveillance technologies. And I think about the kinds of people who, yes, don't go to a protest, and so they think, the old adage, like, I have nothing to hide. But as I was doing my research for the book Algorithms of Oppression, which of course is about information monopolies, total control over what we can find online vis-a-vis search engines, and how incredibly fraught that is. That is not a neutral process, and that is highly controlled. The same arguments and logics hold up for large language models and chatbots that people are using. And one of the things that's very interesting about these kinds of technologies is that if you ask the public, are you comfortable with everything that you've ever searched for on the internet being made available to your employer, to your spouse, to your children, to members of the clergy that you may interface with? People resoundingly, like more than 90% of people, say absolutely not, because we think of the freedom to seek information, to read, to have access to knowledge as being a fundamental kind of private experience, to have that kind of curiosity. But see, those things now are used in courts against you. And in fact, what's so dangerous about so many of these profiling kinds of systems you don't think of as your ChatGPT or your Claude engagements, is that digital profiles, in fact, are built about all of us. And so the seeking and looking for and the making of us into criminals or framing us in particular ways. And think about, I think about all of us on this call, all the things we're constantly using the internet to research, but those things aren't necessarily who we are. But this conflation of everything that you do and all of the information that's tracked by you on your phone and your digital engagements, everything you do on your laptop, building a profile about who you are, and that profile standing as a proxy for who you are in the eyes of the government is actually very, very dangerous. And I think that everyday people who don't think of themselves as activists absolutely should be thinking about these kinds of things, because these kinds of encroachments are becoming completely normalized and are absolutely invisible to most people who are users of technology.
And I can jump in with just a couple of thoughts. Like I think it's interesting because I think the question you're asking, Nora, is a very good one. I would say that there are many communities that exist in the United States in which no one would ever say that, right? If you're in a Black and brown community or you're a Muslim, you're never saying, "Oh, I'm not worried about surveillance because I'm not doing anything wrong," because I think those communities realize that surveillance is not remotely connected to doing anything wrong, right? If you're doing something that the majority doesn't approve of, that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something wrong. So, for example, and I would say this also, the idea that like you're not being surveilled, you need to take that off the table. All of us are being surveilled all the time. No one can escape it. You can't escape it from private companies and you can't escape it from the government. It's too ubiquitous throughout the country right now. But the idea that there has to be a connection between you only have to worry about surveillance if you're doing something bad, I think is wrong. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. One, something that I think is absolutely a good is going to an AA meeting if you're an alcoholic, right? But you may not want the world to know you're an alcoholic. Going to a treatment meeting for that disease is a very positive thing. So you may be doing something that is really a health treatment, but you may not want the world knowing about it. You may not want the world knowing you're going to an oncologist or a certain bookstore. So the idea that there's a link, one of the things that we've seen that I love to talk about, because people are used to talking about focusing on immigrant communities or abortion care seekers or those sort of things. One of the groups that has been targeted by alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and other federal agencies is attendees at gun shows, right? Here comes the right. I'm sorry, what? You're looking at whom? Going to a gun show is not illegal. And yet, I think those people could have something to be concerned about. But the other thing that I would also add is, and I would invite everyone on this call to just take a moment and think about the most embarrassing thing they did in the last year or so, whatever that is. Now, imagine that through surveillance, the government or private industry finds out about that, but not everything else about you. So they do not form a well-rounded, complete view of who you are, but instead just learn about that one dumb or embarrassing thing you did. They could draw a very bad and wrong impression of who you are, and run with that. They could view you as a dissident because, I mean, nowadays, what? You posted something feeling bad that Scott Pelley was fired yesterday. And now you're viewed as an anti-government, anti-right, left-wing snowflake who's likely to try to, overturn the government. And so another problem with surveillance is people making assumptions based on what information they are able to get about you. And if it's not complete, it's not complete. And if it gives a false impression, it gives a false impression. We know that facial recognition all the time misidentifies people of color, especially, it seems, Black men who get arrested and jailed based on false facial recognition, but they don't care. That is a acceptable consequence of the control that government wants to exercise by way of surveillance. And if someone who is an immigrant or is Black or brown or is low income ends up, the back of a police car or prison, that's an acceptable consequence of the surveillance state, and that should bother us all.
Mm.
I'll add,
Memo, jump in.
yeah, I'll add that I think a lot of people have this impression that there's people looking at you like behind the scenes and like through the cameras and analyzing you. I think people need to realize that a lot of the surveillance is AI powered, first of all. And AI is not perfect, and there's different AI systems out there, and they all do their own, conclusions and results. They have predictability models. For example, the flock systems that do the license plate readers, they have predictability models where if they're analyzing everybody driving through a neighborhood, and if somebody's driving pattern changes for some reason that day, they'll notify your local police to kind of go check you out and just follow you and make sure you're not doing anything out of the ordinary. They want to make sure everybody stays in their normal lanes and does the normal things. But AI is not perfect. We're seeing it now with like people now applying for jobs. If you're not going to be applying for a job, guess what? A lot of companies are now using AI models to see if you're going to accept your resume or not. Not like there's stories of people applying to like 80, 70, 150 jobs and getting denied because of AI. It's really not it's easy to say, well, this doesn't affect me because I'm a good person and I stay in my lane and it's not going to affect me. It's not going to affect you until it does affect you. And that's the story with everybody, with everything that happens, especially in authoritarian regimes. That's what all of history is. So now you're living in a world where you're being surveilled by AI, and sure, you're gonna stay in your lane and be normal, and like Mexicans say, calladito te ves más bonito, which is like when you're quieter, you look prettier. Um, um, that's gonna be the case until AI thinks you're gonna be up to something, and then AI is gonna hit you, and then the surveillance state is gonna be part of your problems. And that's kind of the world we're going into. So yeah, everybody. Meta has decided to basically share all their DM information to their chat box to train their chat box AIs. Everybody's social media content, anything you've ever Googled, anything you've ever written on a Google Doc, anything you've ever created, all of that, the wealth, they've literally said this, the wealth of human knowledge and creativity is being used to train AI. All of your, anything you've ever written, any funny joke, any funny wit, um, that's all being used to train AI. We're all training AI. So that's why we all have phones. That's why Facebook's free. That's why Instagram's free. That's why all of these apps are free for us. Pinterest. Um, you think they just give it to us for free? No, they're taking all of it and they're using it to train AI and they're using it to understand your patterns, to try to study how you act. And the moment you start acting out of line, AI is going to be flagging people for the government. And that's exactly what Trump's doing with NSPM-7, using Palantir to start creating this database of people that are going out of line. So yeah, it might not affect you yet, but it will affect you at some point. Like Chad says, not going to take the whole context, just that one little bit, and that's it.
And if I could add one thing to what Memo said, because that's you made a really point. If you're quieter, you're prettier. Like that is really the main objective of surveillance, right? It's not to go out and find people to arrest, although that's obviously something that they do. It's to force conformity. That is the big brother is watching you. That is the if you're quieter, you're prettier. The main impact of surveillance is that it forces people to self-regulate themselves to avoid the risk that they perceive if they are seen doing something wrong. So that is why when we lose our privacy to surveillance, we also lose our right to free speech. We also lose our right to freedom of association, to protest. Freedom of journalists gets hurt. So really, when we do talk about the risks of surveillance, there's the direct, I caught doing something I don't like, but there's also the you best not even come close to the line of doing something that will gain my attention. If you want to really make yourself safe, the way to make yourself safe is to make yourself small and unnoticeable. And that is not a recipe for a free society.
Well, again, we're facing, I think, this question of, well, what do we do about it? And to some extent, we created this webinar as a space for people to learn about the problem, to be maybe a little bit scared, appropriately scared. Memo, terrifying when you talk. And I love that your origin story went from taco truck to like tinfoil hat, sci-fi apocalypse future. But there's something, Amanda has been here this entire webinar, my partner on a lot of our SOS work. I just sort of, I want to be grounded in where we're heading in the next few months. We are seeing efforts at the state level, state legislatures opening up special sessions to gerrymander ahead of the midterms. We know that Trump himself has initiated an anti-Semitism tour to bring the military to 15 cities. As several of you have mentioned, there are other supposed counterterrorism efforts to, create a framework in which anyone who opposes the state is seen as terroristic, as Antifa, as something that is needed as a crackdown. And I want to, Amanda, bring you in because you have been living in this space now for years. You have been working with Congress. You have been working at the state level. You've been working through our Free Press Action network, trying to kind of figure out where is the line? How do we help bring people in to find solutions in the middle of this? So I think I see the chat and I've seen a lot of Q&A. I think we've addressed many of these, though there is an endless request for Chad to give us the 25 solutions to solve all of our problems. So just naming it, we're going to work on that. Amanda, can you share some of your observations? Share with us how we will be rolling out more together, because I think that's not corny. It is pragmatic. We are arming ourselves for what's coming.
Yeah, so over the summer, like we do have a lot of really great activities planned because I know one thing, like when it comes to surveillance, we're dealing with a massive surveillance apparatus. Like all of our panelists have said, we have law enforcement agencies, companies, and government institutions that all uphold our like ever expanding domestic surveillance system. So we really want this campaign to be a resource for people to come in from whatever level of background they have with surveillance. I know one thing that we saw, like in the immediate aftermath of Trump's second term, is that all of the targeting and the way that DHS was being deployed to immigrant communities, and then we also have like NSPM 7 and the language and these attacks were really impacting people who don't typically do surveillance like as part of their work. Like maybe they know about it, but it's not core to what they do. It's just not necessarily part of like their like they're not so in the weeds as a lot of us, like our panelists here. And we really want to be a source of information that's accessible and not overwhelming, and then also provide people ways to, in their personal lives, protect yourselves, be more aware of how to incorporate like good privacy practices into your daily lives, but also really realizing that like no matter how good you are as an individual at making sure that your privacy settings are great, you're not sharing unnecessary information online, and you're trying as best you can to avoid AI tools, which are becoming increasingly hard to avoid as they become kind of just default settings in a lot of tools that we have to use every day. So there also really is, the goal of this is policy change. Because like I said, no matter what you do as an individual, and there's a lot of ways when we talk about, surveillance profiteers like Palantir, Clearview AI, Flock. These aren't companies that you can just boycott and just you'd be like, I'm not gonna use Palantir. I'm not going to use Flock. Like that's just not possible. We really need lawmakers to put in place guardrails and governance structures that prevent domestic surveillance that comes from just like the rampant data collection that's driven by these like massive corporate entities. So that is the goal for 2027 is, free press action. We'll be working with lawmakers on getting like legislation introduced. And as part of this campaign, we're really going to be working with our, partners on the ground in terms of talking to lawmakers like about these issues and just like educating them more broadly. There has been a lot of great activity in cities across the country when it comes to flock cameras. And, there's actually been a number of successes too in cities that have either had their contracts with Flock discontinued and have stopped using them. And so we also want to, talk to these groups and learn from them and see like where they had successes and like help others replicate that like in their own communities. And so that's where we're moving towards like in the next few months. Like I said, stay tuned and like definitely check out our website to stay up to date on what events are coming up. We have some really fun ones because this is a serious topic and it's it can be really weighing. But I think our hope is that like when we're all coming together for the same purpose, it's a little bit lighter. And we wanted to make it so that it's not everything has to be doom and gloom. Like we're going to do things like privacy raves, where you can learn about how to disable features on your devices that are tracking you, and like interact with other like-minded communities, so we can all be learning from each other and sharing information that way. Because like one of the goals of surveillance is self-censorship, and with that comes isolation. People stop wanting to associate with people who you feel like that association like might get you in trouble. You might be seen to be conspiring. And the opposite of that isolation is like standing in solidarity together and basically saying like we're not going to live like this. We can have something better, and actually moving towards that.
Well, thank you, Amanda. I know we have held most of you and your attention for a full hour, and we are just wrapping up now. I want to acknowledge we've gotten a lot of questions in the chat, a lot of comments, and I am grateful for the comments that we've received. We've gotten some questions, for example, about data centers, about how we move forward with legislation and in our communities, what's worth paying attention to. I'll just name a little bit of what's coming so that you can plug into SOS. We will be working in a few ways. One, as Amanda has laid out a broad and long-term agenda, we'll be connecting communities to expose and challenge the expanding surveillance state. I think many of you here, when you listen, see that there is an expansive surveillance state, and it is repressing community engagement. But we want to help educate people all over the country. So that's educating groups, doing teach-ins, cooler than I am, Amanda and her privacy raves, kudos. We're also going to be helping mobilize local resistance to the construction of different projects, including data centers, with the knowledge that this is one of the foremost issues that candidates are asked about, that it is one of those that can help light a spark and engagement for groups that might not see a lot of issues as affecting them. We'll also be challenging the government's weaponization of domestic terrorism powers. And so in the coming months, be ready for more about our briefings, our webinars, our trainings to educate people. But I think it would be remiss if we didn't explicitly call out and thank and get excited about the partners we have, because we are working with nearly 36 groups around the country, from hyper-local groups all the way through national civil rights legacy organizations. We're working with press freedom groups. We are working with librarians, state affiliate groups that work on their own lobbying efforts. Some of our partners may not have surveillance reform as their core of their mission, but the ethos of solidarity over surveillance is to create a hub and help incubate excitement and urgency for what is ultimately an evergreen topic that is touching all of our lives for centuries. So plug in, please sign up and check out solidarityoversurveillance.com. We would love for you to join the movement. I want to thank all of our partners, the dozens and dozens that have been part of SOS. I want to thank our partners, the Disinfo Defense League, for helping to launch SOS. Chad, Safiya, and Memo, my hope is that you'll come back. Maybe we'll do another one of these next year and we'll see how far we've come. We'll have Memo's conspiracy piece come out by then. We'll have Chad's primer on how to save democracy come out by then. Safiya might have a different hair color, we don't know, but always the luminary herself. And so I'm truly honored, because I do believe deep down that solidarity is the only way forward, that the problems that touch someone else will inevitably touch my life and inevitably touch yours. And so as we document, expose, and challenge these threats, I invite you to join. I even challenge you that this is the task ahead. Thank you, and we look forward to more.